Welcome everybody to another week's episode of GetPsyched, where we look at all things mental health, therapy and psychology related. Now today we're looking at a video for kind of the general public out there who want to improve on their mental health or manage things like anxiety or depression even, and we're focusing on how to manage negative thought patterns. Also guys, don't forget to subscribe to GetPsyched. You can hit the little bell next to the subscribe button and you'll get weekly reminders every time I upload on more content where we look about mental health management and psychology. And don't forget also, if you're enjoying today's video, hit the like button and comment on the video as well, and I'll be sure to get back to you. Now in many ways, we all suffer from negative thought patterns to one effect or another. And really those negative thought patterns are kind of contextual, they're contextual based. You may have negative thought patterns when it comes to work. You may have negative thought patterns when it comes to your relationship or your studies, for example. You may even have negative thought patterns when it comes to leisure activities. Either way, we all suffer from them. If negative thought patterns can get a hold of us though, and they can become all-consuming, they can start to fester into different situations in our lives, and they can be really hard to learn how to overcome. But in this week's episode, we're going to take a little bit of a look at how negative thought patterns can impact us and how we actually start to overcome those negative thought patterns. I actually think negative thought patterns are one of the kind of foundational factors to poor mental health. Whenever I see somebody with really high depression or really high anxiety, often those mental health issues are founded on negative thought patterns that have manifested and kind of morphed in a number of different ways for an individual over a number of years. The way that we view ourselves, the way that we think about ourselves, and the way that we think about situations are very correlated to how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about those situations. And actually cognitive behavioral therapy, which a lot of the things I'm going to talk about in today's video are based in, would talk about the fact that we need to change our thinking patterns and our behavioral patterns in order to manage our situations, and often that comes from managing those negative thought patterns. I think the first thing we've got to look at, and one of the things I always try and do on GetPsyched videos is reach to the subjectivity of you, the viewer, when watching this video, because I think you'll have accessed this video, either you're a follower of GetPsyched and you enjoy our content, or you just want to help, you've come across our video because you want to manage your negative thought patterns. And I think one of the keys to do that is to understand where those negative thought patterns have come from in the first instant. And what I would say with that is that it's very subjective, but the first thing I would say is that normally our negative thought patterns are attributed to negative experiences that we've had in the past. So for example, somebody who is a really sociable, like successfully sociable person may not really have negative thought patterns when it comes to new social environments, because their experiences, the evidence in their past suggests that they can handle those situations quite well. However, when somebody has had multiple negative social experiences, they are more likely to adopt negative thought patterns when going into new social experiences. And I'm using kind of social experiences as an example here. But I think it speaks to the importance of how negative previous experiences can lead us into a pattern of negative thought patterns. And that actually can make it really challenging to overcome, because often the negative thought patterns that we have are as a result of things that have happened that weren't very pleasant, or things that have happened that were not all that desirable. And we can't forget those things. We can't pretend like they never happened. We need to learn to accept them in order to move forward and see new situations as new opportunities where we don't need those negative thought patterns as much anymore. So often I think these negative thought patterns do come from negative experiences. It also correlates to something that somebody asked me on GetPsyched just the other week ago about mental illnesses kind of in general, mental health in general, and is it genetic or is it based in our experiences? And like any classic psychologist, I'm going to kind of sit in the fence a little bit with this and say it really is an element of both. If we look at things like severe mental illnesses like bipolar or schizophrenia, for example, there's a really high genetic correlation to diagnosis with things like schizophrenia. So for example, if you had a parent who has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, there's probably around about 70% chance that the offspring will also experience schizophrenia. If you have a twin who has schizophrenia, it's about a 90% chance that the other twin will have schizophrenia. So we can't deny there is a little bit of a genetic element here, but I think also the experiences and the kind of the evidence and the suggestions that we have in our everyday life lead us to challenging mental health situations, and I think it's particularly the case when it comes to negative thought patterns. Our negative thought patterns are also a kind of a symptom, although they can also be a cause of severe anxiety, I think. You would put it like this, you wouldn't expect somebody who has really low anxiety to have very bad negative thought patterns, and you wouldn't expect somebody with really high anxiety to have no negative thought patterns. So I think the two do go hand in hand. I think with excessive anxiety comes the challenges with negative thought patterns, and I think they can both be a cause and a symptom of really, really high anxiety. So I think that's something to really keep in mind as well. Shame and guilt, I think, is another thing that leads to negative thought patterns, and shame and guilt is something that I experience particularly in individuals that I work with that have very high anxiety. They have a high degree of shame that they feel this way. They have a high degree of guilt that they're imposing their anxiety on others, or they're consistently, feeling anxious themselves. So that can really kind of that can create more negative thought patterns. You can see how actually negative thought patterns can become a perpetual cycle. In fact, it's one of the challenges in overcoming it. But perfectionism, high self-criticism, low self-compassion, I think are also things that drive negative thought patterns. Perfectionism in particular, I think, speaks to something that I think is really foundational in all mental health issues, which is low self-esteem. That perfectionism can be evidence of that. So, somebody who needs social situations to be absolutely perfect, the perfectionism of those social situations means that there's no option for error, there's no potential of error, and therefore they wouldn't have to have those negative thought patterns. So I think we can say that perfectionism, high self-criticism, low compassion, low self-esteem, all these things can lead to negative thought patterns. I think another thing to highlight here, before we really start to look at how we overcome those negative thought patterns, is to understand how impactful they can be. And again, I said this at the start of the video actually, I think that negative thought patterns, or perpetual cycles of negative thought patterns, can be one of the cornerstones of poor mental health, particularly anxiety and also depression as well. And when a client comes to me with really severe anxiety, really bad depression as well, we're going to be looking at those thought patterns, and it's going to include things about, like, how do you actually view yourself? What kind of goes on in your head when you enter these social situations, as an example? Or what goes on in your head when you're in this relationship, as another example? Now, I'm not somebody who's really such a believer or user of cognitive behavioral therapy, although I do use it within my practice, but I do think CBT can be particularly helpful here when it comes to understanding the impact of negative thought patterns. It's really one of the premises of CBT, is to recognize that the way we think about ourselves and the way we think about situations will correlate to how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about those situations. And if we can change those thought patterns, then we're going to change how we feel. That's really one of the foundational principles of cognitive behavioral therapy. So I think it's really important to understand that actually the way we think about things is going to have a massive impact on how we experience them and how we actually feel about them. Negative thought patterns can be hugely impactful. So how do we actually start to overcome negative thinking patterns? How do we do it? How do we overcome this? Because it's challenging, it's not easy. My first point is a really, really strange one, but I wanted to start off with it because I think it's something that we don't often talk about. We have to allow space for negative thinking patterns. One of the, and this is actually one of the techniques used in cognitive behavioral therapy when it comes to managing anxiety. Cognitive behavioral therapy sometimes may use a technique where we allow space for worry. So we might designate 15 minutes a day that's there for you to worry. Because if we come to you and say, right, listen, we're going to stop being anxious about everything, that's impossible. I can't come to you and say, right, we're going to stop these negative thought patterns, and every time a thought comes in, you're going to get rid of it. That's not as straightforward as that. It's like somebody who wants to go on a diet. You can't just all of a sudden go cold turkey with food. You can't all of a sudden just cut out all alcohol unless it's really extensive, or all junk food. Things have to be teetered down. They have to be done in stages. So actually allowing space to have a negative thought, to have negative thought patterns, and structure that within your day sounds like a really weird intervention, but actually can be really, really helpful, because it allows you to, throughout your day, oh well, hold on, this isn't the time that I go into my negative thought pattern process. I've set 20 minutes at the end of the day today to allow those thoughts to come and to accept them and for them to be there and for it to be okay for them to be there. I'm going to do that then. It actually allows a structure for you to have those negative thoughts and be okay with them. And it stops us getting into this pattern of, oh no, I've got another negative thought, because that can spiral more anxiety, that can spiral more negative thought patterns. So create some space for negative thoughts. The next tip I would talk about is to write it down and weigh the evidence. Now, don't say it, don't think it, actually write it down. Write down the situations that you're having negative thought patterns about. Write them down. Maybe, like, again, if we use a social interaction example again, maybe you're going to like a party with some people after COVID, hopefully, and you're meeting some new people and you're kind of worried about it and you've got those negative thought patterns coming up again. It's natural, okay? It's an anxiety-provoking situation when you're meeting new people, so that's understandable. Take some time to actually write down what your fears are. Write down what that negative thought pattern is saying to you, what it's doing to you, because one of the ways in which negative thought patterns perpetuate is that they stay solely in our head. And, you know, in our head they can do all kinds of things and they can manifest in different ways. Actually writing stuff down can give us structure, can give us body to those worries. It's a really, really good technique to help get those thoughts kind of almost out of your head and onto a paper that you can structure things and you can understand them a little bit better. So start to write these things down. Once you've written it down, you can then go into something in cognitive behavioral therapy that we call weighing the evidence. So maybe you might go into this new social situation and part of the negative thought pattern is, you know, nobody is going to like me. Nobody's going to think I'm that, you know, attractive, or nobody's not going to think I'm that engaging or sociable or likable. So you write that down. You then go to the social situation, you come back and you think, how much evidence was there to suggest that? You know, I can guarantee there will not be much evidence to support that negative thought pattern. If you're engaging with people, if you're listening and speaking to people, then that's evidence to suggest that you're a likable person. So you've got to write that down as well. I think often it's about writing down the evidence for and against those negative thought patterns and doing that consistently. Honestly, that's going to be a really helpful technique. My next tip is to replace the negative thoughts, not get rid of them. So what I mean by this is often in therapy, or particularly when we're utilizing CBT, I often want to get away from the idea that we need to get rid of things in our psyche, in our mind, or, you know, even our cognitive patterns. I don't think it's so much about getting rid of things. I think it's more about a more compassionate way of dealing with it, which is actually replacing those negative thought patterns. So let's look at it like this. Say again, I'm in that social situation. Rather than saying, right, every time you have a negative thought pattern, we want to get rid of that, like crush it down, you know, get away from it. You know, actually what we start to do is we create a really high intolerance to those negative thought patterns. And then eventually the patterns will present themselves time and time again, and we can become really intolerant to them. That can drive more anxiety. So the repression of those thought patterns sometimes isn't all that helpful. What can be helpful is to say, okay, I recognize that I'm having a negative thought pattern about this social situation, that people aren't going to like me. I can understand where that's coming from. I can understand that that's there. It's okay for that thought pattern to be there. I'm going to replace that thought though with, actually, there's plenty to like about me. You know, this social situation might go well. I might meet somebody that I quite like, or I might meet a couple of people that quite like me. That's a positive thing. By no means is it as straightforward as that, or by no means is it as easy as that. It's not like a light switch. That has to be done consistently. But try not to repress those negative thought patterns. Allow them to be there, accept them, but think about a replacement for those thoughts. So that's often one of the things I talk about with my clients who have high anxiety, is okay, we have those negative thoughts. What's an alternative there? Because we need to create other options. What's a more positive alternative there? And get used to the habit of having those negative thought patterns, accepting them, allowing them to be there, and it's okay for them to be there, but showing a replacement there as well. I think another thing to consider when it comes to overcoming negative thought patterns is to develop your awareness and understand when those negative thought patterns most often present for you. Consider your triggers, although I don't often think triggers are the be-all and end-all when it comes to managing negative thought patterns or managing any kind of mental illness or mental health difficulties. I think we're much more than just our triggers. But triggers can be useful to consider. What kind of situations happen? What kind of things go on around me that result in negative thought patterns? Is it about engaging with new people? Is it about social experiences? Is it about an argument, a certain kind of argument with my partner? Are these the kind of things that cause negative thought patterns? Sometimes what can happen is the negative thought patterns can be all-consuming and we can forget about our triggers. We can forget about the situations that cause us to have those negative thought patterns. So develop your awareness about the contexts and the triggers that cause those negative thought patterns. I think another way of learning to overcome negative thought patterns is imagining if someone else was saying these negative thoughts to you. How would you feel about somebody saying these things to you? What would that do to you? You know, if I think to myself, you know, I'm such a failure, I'm no good, I can't do this, I'm awful at this kind of thing, whatever that might be. Imagine someone else saying that to you. How would you feel if they said that? I can bet you'd feel pretty aggrieved. I bet you wouldn't feel particularly good about it. You'd have something to say to that person if they were constantly berating you in that way. And actually externally processing those thoughts and thinking of them in the form of someone else talking to you can be a really effective way of managing the thoughts, because if you don't like someone else saying that stuff to you, you definitely shouldn't be saying it to yourself. So I think often we can be much more brutal to ourselves than we are to other people. But ultimately, if those thoughts were said to you by someone else and you don't like it, then you shouldn't be saying it to yourself. My last point is to consider what purpose those negative thought patterns are trying to serve you. Now, one of the things that one of my philosophical bases of mental health issues when it comes to negative thought patterns, even things like anxiety, is that often these things are trying to serve a positive purpose, but doing it in a very negative way. So what I mean by that is my high social anxiety, for example, it could be an attempt for that social anxiety to protect me from more failure socially. Like my anxiety could be saying to me, Fraser, do you know, you really shouldn't be going to that party because so many times before you failed and you felt demoralized and you had weeks of feeling really depressed that people don't like you. So I don't really think we should be going to this social gathering. I think we should stay in and just stay in our comfort zone. You know, I'm worried about us going to that party because you might experience some negativity again. You can start to see how the anxiety is actually trying to serve a positive purpose to protect me. It's not doing it very effectively, but it is trying to serve that positive purpose. And I think we need to engage with that positive purpose. We need to engage with what the negative thought patterns are actually trying to do for us in order to learn to overcome them. So for example, if I'm at uni and you know, I'm really worried about more assignments that I'm going to fail, and you know, that negative thought pattern comes in that I'm a failure. I can't do this. I failed so many times before. I should just drop out. That negative thought pattern might be trying to save me to some degree. It might be trying to save me from more humiliation. It might be trying to save me from more failure down the road and the demoralization of that failure. It might be serving that positive purpose, but in a very clumsy way. So we need to engage with the fact that often these negative thought patterns are serving a positive purpose, but they're not doing it in a very effective way. So we need to think about what that positive purpose is and how else we might serve that positive purpose. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching this week's episode of GetPsyched. This week we've been taking a look at understanding and overcoming negative thought patterns. If you've been enjoying today's video, then make sure to hit that like button. You can also share the video with others if you want, and make sure to comment if you've got any questions, and I'll be sure to get back to you. And if you've been enjoying GetPsyched as a whole, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and hit that little button next to the subscribe button. You'll get weekly reminders every time I upload. Thanks so much for watching guys, and hopefully catch you next week.